The bell rang at midnight, a clear note that slipped through the dormitory walls like a cold finger. St. Michael's sleeping roofs held their breath. No hand had touched the brass, the clapper did not move. Tunde woke, the sound threading into a memory he could not name. He told himself it was the wind, or a careless prefect, but the note stayed inside his chest. In the dining hall the next morning everyone spoke in low voices. Teachers smiled too tightly. Tunde kept thinking of Ife, soft laugh, the way she tucked hair behind her ear, convinced, without proof, that the bell's call meant something to her. He felt a tug, as if the sound had left a string tied to his heart. 2 nights later the bell called again. This time Kola, a tall boy who loved girls, slipped from his bunk and walked toward the chapel. The prefect searched for him until dawn. By noon there was no trace. His bed still warm, his shoes in the corridor. The school hushed to a different pitch, fear rather than curiosity. Rumors sprouted fast. Witchcraft, government experiments, a jealous ghost. Tunde watched faces, counting the breaths of friends who had once joked with Kola. He felt guilt, like a slow throb, because Kola had waved at him before leaving and said, "See you at morning drills." Tunde had not gone after him. Instead he had listened, and listened learns how to keep secrets. The disappearances became a pattern. Those who followed the bell vanished as if swallowed by the night itself. Teachers tightened curfews and set guards, but the bell's sound ignored locks. Some parents pulled their children from the school, others whispered that the place sat on unsettled land. The headmaster called meetings, promised investigations, then went silent about the details. Ife missed a week of classes and then returned pale, eyes like a ledger of private things. 2 nights later she was one of those who did not return from the bell's sound. Tunde felt the world tilt. He began to sketch the day they first spoke, the water pump, the mango tree, trying to hold Ife in ink when the world wanted to erase her. Old Mrs. Taju, the seamstress who had mended generations of uniforms, told Tunde a story tucked behind laughter. Long ago a bell had been rung for a bride lost to the river. The bell wanted her company and had kept calling souls ever new. The story smelled of tobacco and cassava, but it had a hard kernel. Places remember pain. The bell remembers, she said, and sometimes it chooses. Tunde found an old school magazine with a black and white photograph of the chapel and a name carved under it. Reverend Amadu, founder and bell ringer, whose daughter disappeared the year the school opened. Tunde traced the letters with his finger like a divining rod. Memory and metal could not both be accidental. He and Kemi, a practical girl from the science block, organized a small stakeout beneath the chapel eaves. They hid in cold shadows, sharing a cigarette they pretended not to enjoy. At midnight the bell sounded, soft, intimate, like a familiar voice. It pulled at them, tugging at the soles of their feet. Kemi gripped Tunde's sleeve. She was the first to laugh, nervy and thin. Kemi moved toward the door to prove herself brave. Tunde lunged, but a hand he didn't know pushed him back instead. By morning Kemi's shoes lay on the steps, the grass around them pressed flat as if someone had knelt and vanished. Tunde's hands shook so hard he could not feel his pulse. Tunde began dreaming in the bell's rhythm. He walked through corridors he had never seen, past faces blood and bright with longing. In one dream Ife reached for him. Her fingers were made of moonlight and apology. He woke certain she was somewhere the bell had folded into another world. The belief hardened until nothing else fit. He read Reverend Amadu's letters found in the library, mangled, apologetic lines about promises to a lost daughter and attempts to mend the world with prayer and bellwood. The Reverend had written of a bargain. The bell would keep watch, and in turn the village would bring offerings. What happens to offerings? Tunde wondered, when offerings learned to ask for company. Tunde climbed the chapel stairs one rainy afternoon when the housemasters were at sports. The bell tower smelled of rust and old hymnals. Its ropes were frayed as if from use no one could explain. He found a small iron key hidden in a seam of stone with a note, "For those who will look." The handwriting resembled Reverend Amadu's in the photographs. Beneath the bell, scratched into the wood, Tunde discovered names, some present, some decades dead. One name was fresh, Ifeoluwa Adebisi. A photograph tucked into the bell's hollow showed a group of students, smiling with a mouth that did not belong to absence. The bell seemed to hum beneath his hands, as if it knew what he meant to do. He consulted an elder from the nearby village, who spoke of 2 ways to answer a bell: to silence it with sacrifice, or to offer it remembrance so it might release its grip. The elder warned that bargains with memories demand truth. Tunde wanted the simple answer, bring Ife back, and the bell, but the elder taught him to listen for nuance. Some things are not lost but waiting. That night Tunde wrote letters to every vanished student, folding them into the seams of his mattress. He whispered their names into the pillow until his throat ached. The bell's ring that night felt different, like a question rather than a command. He decided to meet it on its terms, with a voice full of the people who loved those vanished. On the new moon Tunde followed the bell willingly. He stepped beyond the chapel doors into air that smelled of wet leaves and old rice. The world rearranged itself. The dormitory stretched into a corridor lined with doors that kept opening on memories. Voices braided around him. He saw Kola laughing in a river, Kemi sketching stars, and Ife sitting by the pump, her hair plastered to her forehead in the rain. They reached for him, but their fingers slipped like smoke. The bell swung above, each peal loosening a knot in the air. Tunde realized the vanished were not dead, but tethered to moments they could not leave. Freedom, the corridors suggested, required an untangling. He had come looking for one soul and found many held by the same chain. Ife stood at the corridor's end, closer than a dream and yet unreachable. She smiled as if she had seen him waiting all along. When he reached out, the bell's voice answered, old and patient. It offered a trade, one freed soul in exchange for one bound. Tunde could choose Ife and leave others to their quiet, or he could free all but lose the one heart he loved most. The choice lodged in his chest like a bone. Ife's answer was simple, what matters, Tunde? Her eyes held a plea not to waste the bond that tied them. He thought of Kemi's sketchbook, Kola's laughter, the empty bench under the mango tree. Choosing one felt like betrayal, choosing all felt like surrender. Tunde made his decision in the small hours. He pressed his palms to the bellwood and asked not for Ife alone but for every student whose name was carved there. The bell shuddered, a memory uncoiled, the revenger in Reverend Amadou, the daughter taken, the bargain made out of panic and love. The bell needed to be remembered, not silenced. The corridor brightened. One by one the students stepped forward, blinking as if waking from a long sleep. Ife hesitated, hand at the threshold, then rushed into him with a cry that broke something in both of them and stitched it anew. But not all returned. A few faces remained turned toward the bell, choosing its company. Tunde felt both triumph and a hollow ache. Dawn found St. Michael's messy with reunion and grief. Parents fetched children home. The school held an assembly where silence smelled of rain and relief. Ife stood by Tunde, her fingers warm and real. Students who returned held stories like lamps, some burned steady, some flickered. The bell hung quiet that morning, its rope frayed, its brass dimmer as if it had wept itself clean. Tunde learned that love sometimes asks for a larger heart. He kept a small notebook where he wrote names of those who did not return, not to forget but to remember. At night, on certain new moons, he still held the faintest note of the bell, no longer a command but a memory. He would press his ear to the wood and answer with the names he loved, and the sound would answer back, softer than before.